Welcome to today's oh, welcome to today's SFAA Spotlight, featuring Zeina Barakeh and moderated by Niki Korth.
Thank you, Jose, and welcome again to the SFAA Spotlight for Zeina Barakeh. I'm Niki Korth, and it's an honor to be your moderator today. I first met Zeina at the graduate student orientation at SFAI in August 2009. I arrived embarrassingly late after accidentally going to the undergraduate orientation that morning. Zeina greeted me, handed me a grad center guide, and offered a welcoming smile that was both completely non-judgmental and a gentle suggestion that I should probably get my act together, and that she knew I could. Over the years, first as a student and later as a colleague in the graduate office, I continued to be shaped by the same combination of generosity and a belief in others' abilities. I also had the opportunity to learn more about Zeina's work, her process, and her remarkable dedication as an artist. And I'm very excited for you all to experience that for yourselves today. We'll discuss a few questions interspersed with Zeina's presentation and then open it up to the audience. As Maria mentioned, please feel free to put your questions in the chat at any time, and then we will surface them during the Q&A. So please join me again in welcoming Zeina.
Thank you so much, Nikki. It's so great to be here. And thank you, MT and Jose and SFAA for inviting me. And it's so nice to be in this audience and to see friends and colleagues and family, really. I can name everybody in the audience, but it really means so much to me that you're attending. So I'm gonna jump right into it, and just to explain a little bit, I have structured my talk in terms of junctures. I thought that might be like an interesting way to to talk about my work, and junctures, kind of think about them as disruptions actually that have happened in the past few years that have been very beneficial to my growth as an artist. So there are three main junctures that I will talk about, and these are gonna come in my work. But before getting started, I'm gonna show first the origins or the early works that I've done, and some of the people in the audience are familiar with these works, but they're good to sort of show, to give a context of my work, how it started. And I studied at SFAI, obviously, and I graduated in 2008. And I was initially a painter, which is very common for artists to be painters first and then move on to other things. And then I was hanging out with the film students and I started making animations. Um, so just this is a little bit biographical. So I'm originally Palestinian Lebanese. My father is from Jaffa, and I'm showing this archival image in Jaffa Central Square under the British Mandate of Palestine in 1933. And I'm showing this image because, like here, we see like the British Mandate soldiers. On their horses, and they were beating on the Arab demonstrators at the time. And this image right here, I don't know if you can see with the mouse, like there's the soldier and the horse. They look sort of confounded to me. It's a grainy image, it's black and white. And that sort of became the source of one of the main characters in my animations, like the body of work that I've done, most importantly between 2008 and 2018. So that image of the horse with the soldier kind of became the symbol of the colonizer in a series of animations that I've done. And these animations that I've done, they kind of represent narratives of warfare. And so I have the centaurs. The centaur is the torso of a human and the body of the horse. And then there is the colonized subject, which is represented by myself, who has the horse head and my own body. And in these narratives, I mean, I've done like at least 3 animations like that. So in these animations, I'm always fighting the colonial power and kind of getting agency with that. So I'm gonna show an excerpt here. It's a little bit on the longer side, like about 3 minutes. Oops, sorry. Hold on a second. This animation is called Slam Bang Blue, and it's in from 2018. Okay. So that was the animation in a way was important because and Nikki, maybe now if you have any questions you can ask. But this animation was important for me to show because it's part of a trilogy which started like in 2016. But only recently I realized that very intuitively, I was thinking about enhancement, human enhancement in a way. Like now, when I look at the centaurs, the body of the human merged with the tank or with the horse, or I was thinking of this sort of hybridity and the human enhancement before even knowing that many years later, that was actually going to become like my actual research. So I just wanted to flag that here right now because later on in the talk, I'm going to talk about what I'm actually focusing on right now, which is human enhancement, and I'll explain more about that later. Yeah, so any questions, Nikki, you'd
Yeah,
like?
could you expand a little bit more on the that aspect of hybridity? And exactly what you were saying with, human animal hybrids and then evolving into human machine hybrids, and what was the sort of function in that in your work?
Yeah, actually, that was kind of, again, very intuitive. I mean, because I started by showing that archival image, it was a visual kind of sensitivity that like, it wasn't actually very deliberate at the beginning when I started doing that. But of course, then you have these conversations with artists and also with people at SFAI, and like you and I have always had conversations in the office. I've always had conversations with Tony about my work, to which I'm very grateful for both of you with this, and other artists that I'm connected with, like in my life. And that hybridity kind of functioned more as a dialogue with history, going back to like thinking about mythology on some level. And also the concept of hybridity, when you combine two elements that are typically not combined, and you sort of create new meaning with it. But I think the way it's a new meaning is that it's catalyzed. It becomes faster because as artists, when we construct things, we are always making new things. But when you create two elements, like when you merge like a human with an animal, or even with the image, the frames, the monuments that I construct digitally, like a digital collage, um, you're kind of exploring and testing and sort of creating new meaning out of that by combining and merging elements that typically don't go together. So, and that has become more of a personal signature in my work. It started off randomly, maybe, and then it became a lot more deliberate. Thank you for that question. I always, somebody asked me about the hybridity. Okay. So the second juncture, or sorry, the first juncture actually was in 2020, and that juncture is very important. Of course, it was the pandemic, and it was SFAI crisis that was beginning, and this was a very important moment in my career, because when I moved to the US in 2006, SFAI really became my grounding in the US, my family, the institution I belong to, the community that I belong to, um, and all my work there and my interactions with artists, all different kinds, different approaches, different everything. That was an incredible environment to grow in, to mature in as an artist. So that was very important. And when the SFAI crisis started, it was, of course, a very uncomfortable change. It was not it was a very sort of sad experience. But of course, when there's change, we have to adapt to it. So that was kind of like a disruption. And when there's a disruption, we start trying to have agency in it. And it was the same with the pandemic. So it wasn't only like institutional collapse. There was a pandemic, which was a global event, obviously. And so that added a lot more kind of pressure on artists and on us. And I think maybe for each one, the outcome manifested later on or in the same year, but it manifested one way or another. So for me, that transition kind of got me to get into public art, and that was like here I'm showing obviously on the SFAI Tower. This is my first experience of showing artwork as public art. I've always seen public art with artists at SFAI, but of course not my own. And it's a different kind of experience, and it's site specific. So here, like you can see that same kind of animation, where the arches and the monuments kind of work very well with the architecture of the building, like the tower and the windows. So that was part of the show Tunnels of the Mind, which was curated by the film chair, Orit Ben-Chitwit, at the time. And I also got to see a show also on ZAZ Corner's Jumbotron in New York. And so here, this is where I started thinking, like, what is the importance of that work if I show it as public art? And for me, it was like, okay, I'm showing on like a billboard, so it becomes like an advertising. An advertising of a war narrative that is marginalized, but I'm showing it like the site became very important because I'm showing it in New York. I mean, New York is the city of capitalism, right? And capitalism and war, they go together. So that made me understand the importance of public art and site specificity, right? Because it was a big jump for me from showing in galleries and museums and sort of limited audience. Then, and the artists in the audience who are established and have a long history, like Tony and Doug Hole and they already like they know this. For me, this was something kind of like new. That I sort of learned. So that was my first public art experience. Yeah.
Zeina, could you share a little bit more about, given that this was your first public art experience, how are you perceiving the audience and just the different considerations given the context of doing this in Times Square and then, on the SFAI Tower? Because it's a very different audience than the other types of exhibitions.
Yeah, like it's a very different audience. I mean, this was also a show that was not necessarily planned. Like I was invited to show, and I was part of like a series of other artists who showed this. But the audience was, it's a different audience than when you do for galleries and museums because the audience sort of goes in and like when people who go to galleries and museums they're going there to see the work and to see the art, but when you're showing artwork in a public place where people are just gonna lift their head and look up for a few seconds, they might stop, and if the visual is very intense and they will go on about the day. So it's a different kind of calculations that you have to make because you have to think of the time, like how long is somebody's going to stop and watch this, right? Versus I'm going specifically to the gallery to see the artwork and to be inspired by the artists that are in the show. So that was, I think, the concept of the audience shifted. It was no longer limited to uh, people who are involved in art. It was just more people who are everything, and that's very powerful. I find it opens up the meaning of the work in a way that the gallery and the museum don't do in a way. Like it's the gallery and museum, it's very like it's a circle that's very contained. It's academic, it's scholarly, it's art, it's public art is like and I'm still learning, I've just done few pieces public art, so I'm I'm not really there yet. but but it definitely changed how I think about the work. And for me, that was very powerful. And I started leveraging that with my work. Yeah. Thank you, Nikki. So while at SFAI and during the SFAI crisis, so now I'm gonna transition to juncture number 2, and I decided to study global security, and I decided to go back to school. and that idea of going back to school was important. I mean, it was triggered by what we were going through in the pandemic and the SFAI institutional collapse in a way. It was a lot of pressures also, like feeling like I felt like I didn't have any agency in my life. Like things were confining in a specific way. And this is when I started thinking that I wanted to go back to school, because the conversations we were having as a community during that phase of transition in SFAI was very fruitful. There was a lot of give and take, a lot of ideas. It was like a big community being at work together, not in a comfortable setting. Again, it was very uncomfortable perhaps, but there was an intensity to the dialogues that were occurring within that environment that I had never experienced before. And I suspect that the SFAI community also had not experienced that before, but I don't know. But for me, that was like a very stimulating environment, and it made me think like I wanted to go back to school. And I thought, okay, so what do I study? And I decided to go for global security, because I grew up in Lebanon as a civilian in warfare. So that's the experiences that have shaped my art basically. And then I thought, okay, I wanna, like, if I'm talking about warfare from the perspective of the civilian, I also need to understand on the opposite side, from the position of the military. How does that work? So I decided to enroll online in the global security program at ASU to do an MA. But then this is a program it's not military, it's a civilian program, but all the people and the faculty in it are mostly either affiliated with the military or government agencies, or they work in defense, or so it was an environment that didn't have artists, and they embraced me. They were very happy to have an artist in that program. And and it was a very intense experience for me to make that jump, because I was thinking, I grew up in warfare. It's not like an easy it's not a it's not an easy environment to be in. So I thought like, okay, do it and then think about it, or I don't like it, I can always leave. And I decided to also enroll at the European Graduate School, and I haven't finished, I'm still pursuing a PhD. And that was in philosophy. And not that I know anything about philosophy, I don't know shit about philosophy still, but it's it was a program that helps me stay grounded in ethics, because I am in two very different schools. And also ASU is a public university, right? It's a university system. So at that time, that juncture was very important, because I was immersed in a community of artists at SFAI, which was so beautiful, right? And the SFAI is very specific, it's an art school. But then I was also studying at a public university, and it was online. It wasn't like in person. So it was very abstract on some level. And I was also in this other program in Switzerland, the European Graduate School. And the European Graduate School, it's also similar to SFAI on some level. Like, it's very open. There are no academic restrictions. They don't function like the typical restrictions that you see in academia, where everything you say has a weight and has to be crafted in that has to follow the restrictions of academia in a way. It's a very free place. So anyway, that got me to, it changed the way I make artwork, I think. So I think this is the first piece that I feel I was like it had a different impact. It's called Standard of Capital, and I'm showing it because it was playing on the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco. You know, you see this building, it's very phallic, and it showed at the top, and it was inspired by this tablet, which is called the Standard of Ur. It's a small tablet in the British Museum collection. And the Standard of Ur, this tablet, it had two sides, the war and peace panel, so different sides. But I was very intrigued about the way the figures are stacked next to each other. We can see prisoners. You know, it's like we're talking about 2550 BC, and you see images of prisoners in the second row, kind of like vulnerable, naked, hands tied. Some have things over their eyes. And this was excavated by Sir Leonard Woolley, who was an archaeologist and a spy. He was British. And that was in Iraq. So I thought, okay, I'll work with this, but aesthetically, I couldn't really do much with it. So instead, I started sourcing visual imagery from this tablet, which is Assyrian art. And the theme for the work was I was invited to make a piece about refugees. So this is why I went to Mesopotamian art, because I thought, okay, Sumerian art, like the piece that I showed you before, and this is Assyrian art. Mesopotamian art means, you know, it references Iraq. And I was thinking of the American invasions of Iraq and the refugees that have left Iraq. And so I extracted these figures that you saw in the tablet, and I had them loop on the Salesforce Tower. So in a way, in my mind, I was thinking, okay, you know, it's refugees, they get displaced, they get extracted from their own environment, and they have to go somewhere else for safety. So that was kind of the parallel between taking an image out of the tablet, you know, outlining, cutting out the king here, for example, or these figures, and then placing them in a completely different context. So that was kind of the metaphor with this work. And I had the work, also in a way, I thought of it as a reversal because, you know, we're talking the Salesforce Tower. It's a tower, so it's a watchtower too. You know, we can think of towers on borders, in prison systems. So that was the reversal in a way. So I'm placing the symbol of the refugees on top of the tower to survey the city. And that is a kind of what it ended looking like. At the time. And this screened during September, the month of September, for one month. It was part of the Midnight Artist Series, so every day at midnight. It played for an hour or more, and then it stopped. So they go on a loop, you know, it becomes sort of like an eternal loop. And also, you know, this tower, you know, this is also, maybe I didn't elaborate much. It was on the electronic sculpture that was made by Jim Campbell, you know, who's very famous also for his work and his work with low resolution. So with this piece, the challenge also was to create work because you saw my early animations, they're very high definition, very like visually intense, right? Very high definition. And then I had to stream this animation on a low resolution system. So all the like details were softened, were reduced. It goes back to the basic. So I thought of it as a way of also thinking of video games, which are used in the military. And, this is an Atari sort of still, because I grew up playing Atari like in the 80s as a teenager. And, you can see the imagery is very low resolution. And, it was important also to think about it as video games. In order to reference the video game systems also that were used in the military. So this is where my studies in academia started pouring into my artwork and changing it. The next piece that I wanted to show, this is, it was a commission by the San Francisco Arts Commission that I applied for. It's for their new building on 49 South Van Ness. And the instructions were that we had to do work that was related to the history of San Francisco or the building. So, sorry, not the history, like related to San Francisco. I went back to history because I'm always in dialogue with history. And so what you see here, this is also another repetitive pattern, the video game aesthetic. I just talked about the Atari. Actually, this one is also kind of Atari related. It's like Pac-Man. This animation functions where the griffins you see on the screen, they go around and they topple these monarchs. So these monarchs that I got, these are each one from a different painting by a master painter from the 16th and 17th and 15th century. And I put them together, and what they have in common, these monarchs, they are all implicated in the conquest of the Americas. So what happens in this animation is that this griffin goes around and topples each one by one. And that's kind of like a statement by itself. And talking about history, so the idea of the griffin came from my research of Garcia Rodriguez di Montalvo, and he was a 16th century novelist who wrote the novel The Adventures of Esplandian. And in that novel from the 16th century, he had the Spanish knights. They go and they meet this fictional island it was ruled by Queen Calafia. Queen Calafia is a black queen. And so it's a fictional island. It's a fictional character, Queen Calafia. And Queen Calafia on this island, she had the griffins. So this is with the griffins, she fought the Spanish knights. Now in the story, she marries one of the knights and converts to Christianity. So of course, I changed that narrative in this one. And, it's done in a way. I mean, this is sort of works it's a waiting room in that building. So people, you go sit on those orange chairs. And another scene, this is also where I became interested in human enhancement. So that's part of the same animation, and you can see the hybridity as well with lizards, with the desert, the figure being worked on. And this was inspired by, the figure also by Diego Rivera's large figures and, combined with other scales. And for me, it was referencing the desert as a testing ground for military technologies. That's why I have the scene with the desert. And there is the rain referencing, those green raindrops. They also show they reference the drought and the desert. Okay. Next, I'm gonna speed it up a little bit because I think I'm going on I'm slowing a little bit. So then I've done this work, the Gardens of Malady. Again, you're gonna see a lot of hybrid elements. And here it's a dialogue with history where I am combining different time periods and different aesthetics. I'm using Persian miniature and Chinese miniature and Mughal miniature, and it has like different references to the global order. So I'll play this short excerpt. It's about maybe 1 minute. Okay, and so here I wanted, and I also made a piece, Cozy Calafia APT 47. So this is a piece that has the same concept as the earlier one that I showed for the San Francisco Arts Commission. It's the same context, but this one references cyber warfare more specifically. Because we don't really hear about cyber warfare. We're busy online watching the kinetic warfare, unfortunately, like being streamed online. But with Cozy Calafia APT means Advanced Persistence Threat. That's a very specific term for cybersecurity. And 47 references the Trump's presidency, the 47th presidency. And Cozy Calafia references a Russian cyber hacking group, hackers called Cozy Bear. And they've done multiple attacks on the US defense. And these are things that I've learned in my program, in the global security program. I mean, I can talk a lot about the context of these attacks or whatever. But for me, I wanted to take it back to the art and to consider that possibility. So in a way, it references cyber warfare and the Trump presidency. And I will show this segment. Okay. Um, okay. Any questions, Nikki, before jumping?
Yeah, I mean, I had a question prepared. You answered it quite a bit, but I don't know if you wanted to elaborate any more on some more about your experience in the MA in Global Security program, and especially as you're mentioning, cyber warfare from that last video. Um, how did that go about, or how did you feel about the outcome and just the overall experience for how it impacted your work and just being in that different sort of community?
I think that was the most important experience that I've had in the last maybe 20 years, really, because I was immersed in an environment that I did not fit in. So you have to survive in it. I'm like a Palestinian Lebanese woman in a global security program that was, you know, connected to military studies, right? So you have to negotiate that presence. And they were very receptive. My colleagues and my peers were very receptive because in the conversations about, drones and quantum technologies and warfare and cyber warfare and all of that, I was always sort of bringing in the perspective of the civilian, the lived experience. It wasn't something abstract. I could say, well, this is how that might um, feel for people like this or that. And I also, it was such an experience to grow. Sorry, because I had to learn how to um, state my opinions, my perspectives, because now I'm in a very comfortable context. I'm like among artists. I'm talking to my home base, to my community. I'm already feel very like relaxed, and I'm saying things maybe I don't say in other contexts. But in that program, you have to be very cerebral and very rational. You cannot be dramatic, and people who know me in the audience know that I'm very dramatic as well. And my interactions, right? They're imbued with like emotion. So that was kind of like a uh, very big experience to learn how to negotiate that environment and I did very well actually. I graduated with distinction in that program. Surprisingly, like I was always like, I'm not gonna do well, I'm not gonna do well, and of course you kind of end up doing a lot better. Thank you for that question. And so I'm going to move on to the last juncture, which was kind of very important also. And this is when I started teaching at ASU in 2024. And in my first semester, I applied for a grant. It's a big university with a lot of resources. They're like number one in innovation and they like interdisciplinary research. So I applied to the Leonardo ASU Seed Grant and I got it. And so then I started doing the sabotage research. And this is where I really started planning how to merge those two fields because my brain was sort of divided. There was the Zeina art and there was the Zeina global security. And I would switch everything, how I talk to about things or how I talk to people, depending on what hat I was wearing. So that became a place where, okay, now I really have to merge these two fields. And so I started this official research where I I had to, on human subjects. So I had to, with human subjects, not on human subjects, with human subjects. And I was working with veterans doing art workshops with them. And actually, one of the co-investigators in that research was Ryan Kirkpatrick, who's also an SFAI alum who happens to be teaching at ASU. And so my research, I had to submit it to an institutional review board to check that everything is safe for participants to be in. So that was also like a huge learning experience. So here with that shift, my practice sort of started becoming more socially engaged and participatory. I started with gallery museums, then I became public art, and now I'm actually working with a community. I work with veterans. I have done now 8 workshops, day-long workshops with veterans, different generations, different wars and conflicts. And so the research was about human enhancement. So here I'm going to switch and show some slides of what that research is about. So this is not art here. This is more talking about it. So my research is about brain-computer interfaces. And these are devices that the military is developing to enhance, to give war fighters, you refer to soldiers as war fighters, to give them and to enhance their cognitive powers. And so these devices are generally in 2 main categories. They are either invasive, they are surgically implanted inside the brain. So think about it like a computer connected to AI in your brain, or they are non-invasive and they are worn like helmets. And the difference is, if it's surgically implanted, then that device in your head can provide high resolution imagery and data, but of course it's a greater risk because it involves surgery, whereas the helmet that is worn, there is a disruption of the signal because of the hair, the skin, the scalp. So there's signal degradation, but it's safer. I'm not going to go into the why the military is developing that or anything, but my interest in this, for the sake of this presentation, is more the implications of those technologies on society. Because when you have, now we see warfare and we see the events that have happened nationally and internationally in the last few years. Just imagine that if you have war fighters who are enhanced with these technologies. Think about the laws of war, think about the restrictions, think about the infractions of these guidelines and what that means. And so some of these societal implications, and this is not also limited to brain-computer interfaces. These, for any new military technology or any new technology in general, some of these aspects here, implications are gonna anyway happen. So you might have groups that are enhanced and groups that are not. Then we would have to think what does it mean if this person is enhanced, and then the person next to them is not? What does that mean to democratic values like equality in a society? People are not going to be equal in a way. People are already not equal because of technology access, but that sort of makes it more. And these technologies, they are used because they are still being developed and tested. Maybe they're not deployed right now. They're future technologies, but near future. They allow soldiers to process a lot more information. They receive a lot of data. They can sort it out much faster. It increases their memory, their focus. It reads their body signals, so it tells the commanders if they are actually ready for combat. It tells them their stress level. They can communicate with each other telepathically. It's mediated through the device. They can look at each other. They don't need verbal speech, and that frees up their hands to control the AI system weapons. And the reason the military is doing that also is because the AI weapon systems have become very sophisticated. And at one point, the human brain can no longer keep up with it. So the operator, meaning the warfighter, has to be um, uh, they have to be able to operate these very sophisticated. So that's why they need the support of the AI devices. So you also like going back to the implications, you want to think about the power concentration in enhanced military. What does that mean for exploitation? Like, of course, any technologies, they can be excellent, very beneficial, but they can also be abused and misused. So we have to think of exploitation, we have to think of environmental shortages. And these technologies, you know, medically, they have excellent benefits. They help with Alzheimer's, with Parkinson's. Eventually, I mean, that's still being developed. They help with mobility already, paraplegia and spinal cord. So that's basically where these technologies are going. So this is where I started really thinking about brain computer interfaces and what my sabotage research at ASU is focusing on, and it's been going on for 2 years. So art-wise, I have created these enhanced figures where I merged plants and animals with the human body. So here you have corals that replace the bone structures. And these figures that I created, they're inspired by I went back again to history and notice the Egyptian Abu Simbel temple. Like here we have colossi that are made from stone and they guard they guard the temple. And so these figures, I made them digital, and I'm showing here a public art, and you can see me just to give you a sense of the scale on the mixed center facade of an ASU and City of Mesa building in Mesa. So I think of them as guardians of cyberspace, these figures. Here is another shot of those figures that I created. And I create these installations now because that helps me circulate the project in the art world. And then I have the workshops with the veterans, which is very participatory. And the veterans, they create their own representations, life size. Like they trace their own bodies on canvas and then they cover them with paint and collage and they create their own version of their enhanced or healed bodies. And those experiences of workshops have been very humbling. It's a whole other level of doing art practice in a participatory way. So that's from a solo. So I display them indoors or on as public art, and just to give you a sense of the scale. And I will play this video. Very different kind of work from what you've seen before. Okay, and I believe that was the last. Oh, that's a shot from how it would look like. This is in the sub gallery at ASU actually, and it's not as large as that space was, but just to give a sense of, it would be kind of like you walk into the chamber and then you're surrounded by these figures. And this is sort of a detail to show that I use. So when I talk about brain computer interfaces, so just to kind of show that. Thank you so much, Nikki. I think we're just about on time. Like it's like 11. So I don't know if you have a question or
Yeah, I do. We welcome any questions in the chat. While we're waiting for any potential questions, I can ask a quick one. With these sabotage figures, for me, there's a feeling it's eerie, but there's also some feeling of benevolence. And you were talking before with the brain-computer interface about enhancement and healing alongside also the potential enormous risks for the people and for society. So I'm just curious, with these sabotage figures, do you see them more as like these nurturing figures, or is it a contrast? And also, like, when are they from? They feel very timeless, even though they're connected to technology.
uh, actually, that's a great question. I don't know myself, these figures, how they came to become that aesthetic. I mean, there's a huge change with the aesthetic from what you saw in the previous animations. But as an artist myself, this feels a little bit more honest, more visceral, more connected to my raw experiences of war. I mean, they look like a little bit like monsters to me, and I probably shouldn't say that about my own work, but they kind of fluctuate between sort of very dark figures, but also they're holding hands and they're hugging. So there's that as well. And I think they represent some sort of dark um, sort of experiences. I don't know. They have gotten that comment that they do feel timeless. They look like future warriors and ancient warriors simultaneously, and it's a very different experience where you're in the same space with them. And it was a very different way of working for me with animation, because my animations were very colorful. And these actually circle back to my original paintings that I used to do at SFAI in 2007, because I used to do these large tormented and dismembered figures, and they represented the trauma of war. They were a lot more visceral, not cerebral. These are more like I don't know, it's kind of like it shows the growth of an artist who's become both cerebrally and emotionally more sophisticated in terms of output. And I still don't know where they're going or what I'm gonna do with them, but I know I'm actually considering going back to painting um, now with these figures, because I feel the virtual is a little bit. I miss the physicality. I miss something physical. The virtual is so fleeting. It feels like those experiences are very fleeting. Yeah, I guess I'll stop here. Thank you so much, Nikki. I hope that answered your question. And thank you so much for the audience that's here and that have stayed throughout the talk. And yeah.